Hi everyone, Hank Prybylski, Global Vice Chair Transformation at UI, and I'm really excited today here with Geoffrey Moore, leading author, advisor to many of the top venture firms in the world and top companies. Also the author of Crossing the Chasm and Zone to Win. And we're going to talk about some of the leading practices around business transformation and innovation and what Geoffrey's seeing on all these opportunities great firms are responding to. Maybe first to get started, Geoffrey, you want to talk to us about the Zone to Win concept and how it's helping facilitate innovation at scale?
Yeah, so my life's work, as you know, Hank, has been involved with how do you bring disruptive innovations to a marketplace. And the first book, Crossing the Chasm, was how would a startup do that? And this most recent book, same problem, but how would an established enterprise do that? And you said, well, it's the same journey, can't you use the same playbook? And the answer is no, you can't. It's because there's a conflict of interest between the various constituencies inside the enterprise. And so, and people have known about it forever, and we call it the innovator's dilemma, we call it the antibodies and the corporate immune system and all these things. But I thought, come on, we got to sort this out. So the zone model says, look, there are zones of interest that are totally legitimate. Each one has a governance model. It's different from the other zones. So we have a performance zone. Those are the guys that make the numbers, men and the women that make the numbers. They make what we sell and sell what we make, and we report it out in earnings call, and that everybody gets that zone. And it's got a very clear governance model. And then there's a productivity zone, which is all the cost centers behind the scene to make the performance zone work. All the finance, HR, IT, facilities, marketing, customer success, you name it. If you're not charging the customer for it, it's probably in the productivity zone. And those two zones are like 95% of the company. It's the core business. Well, then you say, okay, but how do you catch the next wave? And you can't start that disruptive activity inside either of those two zones. They're designed to run with inertial momentum on your core. So you create a third zone called the incubation zone. Many companies have struggled with that, but one of the things we learned and we talk about in the book is the venture capital industry knows how to run that zone. Yep. And we can take lessons, not from their financial model, but from their operating model. And so there's a whole bunch about how you would have a third governance model for the incubation zone, and that's kind of new stuff. And then there's a fourth zone called the transformation zone, which you do not activate unless it's like, in case of emergency brake glass. That's when you want to take a disruptive innovation to scale that might cannibalize your existing business. And that requires the company to realign around a set of priorities about get this thing to scale no matter what. And that's when the CEO really has to step up and bring the entire corporation together. That's proven to be the make or break move for many corporations.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And one thing is, as I've launched this new role and we're driving the EY transformation, we've adopted your Zone to Win framework. Well, and that clarity of focus of the incubation zone and the performance zone, and really challenging yourself to drive as much innovation into that performance as you can while staying focused on protecting that transformation zone. We're taking that to heart. One of the things we've observed in the pandemic is companies have learned that they can move ever quicker than they thought. They had to adjust their business models on a dime. Talk about how that, in the Zone to Win concept, how does that reflect itself, and how can organizations maintain that ability to find speed?
Going forward, actually, it's actually more of a crossing the chasm idea in that. In any disruption, there's a kind of an adoption life cycle, and the early adopters are the ones that go ahead of the crew, and they actually buy in right away. But what we call the mainstream market, they wait and see. And that's why it's so hard for corporations normally to move fast, because they're continually waiting for more proof points, better data, could we do further decision? What the pandemic did is it said, I'm sorry, you don't have any time. Oh, so and we call that, in Crossing the Chasm, we're always talking about pragmatists in pain. And so when you have those forcing functions, you find you can do it. And in fact, you didn't need all those extra cycles to do it. But it's interesting, in the absence of a forcing function, most companies go much slower than they need to.
Great insights. And one of the things we're hearing from a lot of companies is, how do they hold on to that forcing function to drive to new transformations and carry that forward?
Okay, there are two ways you can do that. You either do it by the way, the two books in Zone to Win are about these two ways. Either you use your competitors to motivate you, so that's
Yeah.
Microsoft. Oh my gosh, if we don't get our in gear very, very quickly, we're going to get our lunch eaten. Or you use your customers' emerging needs to say, look, we're letting down our customers if we don't get to this new place as fast as possible. Either one of those things can inspire. You have to inspire a company to change rapidly. What doesn't work is we've put together a change management committee in charge of a transformational initiative and we're reporting out on a monthly basis. That doesn't work.
Building off of that inspiration,
Yeah.
when you look at leading transformations, we talk at humans at the center. Really putting your customers, and increasingly we're seeing post-pandemic, the employees at that center of the transformation. What advice would you go to leading firms on that?
I mean, look, transformation is incredibly painful. It's unnerving. You're disoriented. You don't, all of your natural sort of guideposts are gone. And so if you put the person at the center of that thing and you say, look, we want to be in service to this person's success, whether they're an employee or a customer or whomever, then everybody says, okay, we're going to lean in together. We know we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to go forward together. If you try to manage it by the book or manage it by the numbers, it doesn't work.
Yeah. No, it's great. Thank you. Let's jump into the incubation zone.
Okay.
A lot of what we're seeing now is the pace of disruption is accelerating. The amount of capital to fund disruptors who are getting scale is ever more important. So how do firms find out that they stay ahead of that? How do they invest in that incubation zone and then scale that?
Well, the key thing to the incubation zone is unlike the performance zone has a clock. It's every quarter, right?
Yep.
The productivity zone has more of a long view of things. But in the incubation zone, every day is an urgent day. So time is the most important currency. And so what you're trying to do in the incubation zone is use the startup model. Get to a minimum viable product as fast as you can. Get your first customer as fast as you can. Get your first great references as fast as you can. Get your first repeatable use case as fast as you can. And you have to operate each of these opportunities like a little tiny business. And so therefore they can't rely on the sales force in the performance zone. They can't rely on the engineering teams in the productivity zone. You've got to kind of set up these sort of semi-autonomous units because what you're caring about is speed, cycle
Yep.
time, and low latency decision making. And so just creating that spirit and then holding them accountable to making their milestones.
Yeah.
One of the things corporations don't do is they don't hold incubation zones accountable enough. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's very,
That's
very
good,
great
that's
thing.
good.
I mean, one of the things we've been looking at as we're driving our incubation zone is we talk about the 3 V's. Are we driving volume of ideas? Are we driving velocity of ideas? And do we think those ideas are driving value?
Yeah.
And framing it to the value of our customers, our employees, and society from a long-term value perspective.
Right. And one of the keys to that velocity one is, and this, they always talk about fast failure, and you're always thinking, well, how good is fast failure? But the point about fast failure is it's win or learn. So either win, which is, by the way, that's our first choice. But if we don't win, then let's learn.
Yep.
And by the way, learn and iterate, so remediate and do it again. And so velocity, of the 3, velocity is the one that I think most people struggle with.
I love that idea of that velocity of learning. Let's switch gears. You're the CEO, and you're looking at our transformation zone. What if your transformation zone is empty?
Yeah.
What if you're looking for that new idea?
Okay.
How do you step back and challenge yourself?
Well, first of all, any year that your transformation zone is inactive is actually a good year, because when you go into a transformation zone, it's like open heart surgery. It's not fun and it's not healthy. But so the first issue is, can I get anything from the incubation zone into my performance zone in a more iterative, gradual manner so that I don't have to run a huge transformation? Sometimes you can't. We call that modernizing the core business, which your customers love, your ecosystem loves. It's not transformational, but it buys you another 5 to 10 years of active life. So it's a really good outcome. But when you have to run a transformation, then the issue is, okay, then it's the issue of, okay, when do I start this? Because once you start it, you start a clock. Every day that you're in the transformation zone is a bad day. So you want to make sure that when you start that clock, everybody's running. And by the way, there will be people who will be in resistance to the transformation, and you have to get them off the team immediately.
That's a great concept. You're really talking about when you're committed to the transformation zone, it's not for the faint of heart.
No, it's not.
We talk about a lot about transformational leadership and the leadership example. How do you build the consensus on that team? How do you build that courage and curiosity around innovation, the discipline, determination around that transformation, What if you're an executive group? How do you really look and say, do I have this?
Well, first of all, you have to respect the fact that you're going to run the other 3 zones. It's just that the transformation takes priority. So the first thing is, look, you want people in the performance zone saying, I'm going to do everything I can to make my number, and you're saying, yes, please do. But if a resource is needed to support the transformation, you must give it up. So that's one big, just negotiating that agreement, because people in the performance zone tend to hoard resources because they want to make their commitments, right? So that's a tough one. But if you get that, and then you tell the productivity zone, look, we want global standards, we want regulatory compliance, but if we have to make exceptions to make the transformation happen, you've got to be able to figure out a way to do that and not put us in jail, but do that. And in the incubation zone, we want new ideas, but right now, if the transformation is taking a resource that you have, you give it up. And so I think that's what and the reason it's got to be the CEO is nobody else in the corporation has the right to go to every zone and ask for sacrifices.
Right, so it's really that CEO leadership at the top and clarity on the leadership model of each of the zones.
Yeah.
Maybe as we look forward, we got driving into sustainability, focusing on long-term value, huge opportunities coming out of the pandemic, and the empowerment of the employee. What bit of advice would you give to business leaders as they're looking to chart their own transformations towards the future?
So we always have this phrase North Star, right? But inevitably, and by the way, when you're kind of in the middle of an ongoing successful enterprise, you can kind of lose sight of the North Star because you're following the traffic light in front of you. But when things are changing, it's really important. And so the North Star has got to be first of all, it's got to be strategically appropriate. So it's the right, you're going north. It's the bear, follow the drinking gourd. But then second of all, it's got to be inspirational because, as you said, it is human centric. And when you ask people to do these things, you're asking them to take personal risk, ego risk. They're going to embarrass themselves. You're going to make mistakes. You may be taking career risk. So you have to make it important enough that people go, and it's worth it. And so you can't just mail it in. And this means that it has to be genuine. It can't be something that the PR folks do for you on the side.
I think that's great advice. So really continue to focus on that power of the North Star and the alignment and inspiration around.
And one of the ways you can do that, one of the questions I try to get CEOs to ask themselves and executive teams is, what do you think the world wants you to do? Forget about your shareholders for the minute. Forget about the board. What do you think the world wants from your corporation? And can you put yourself in a place to give that back to the world?
And I think that's perfect because if you answer that question, you are answering the long-term value creation.
That's right. Yeah.
So I really want to thank Geoffrey for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. We've been a huge fan in adopting the Zone to Win framework. I know it's brought a ton of insight, inspiration, leadership to us here at EY, and thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you. Enjoyed being with you, Hank. Thanks.